Hello YouTube, I'm back with another build guide, and this one's a little unique. And you might think, is this the wrong year to make this build? And I'm gonna say no. We can make Radial Javelin Great Again, and it doesn't require a buff from DE, but please DE, please buff Radial Javelin. And I think there's a really easy path for them to do that because of the way it works and the way it doesn't seem to be advertised in any of the wikis or anywhere that I've seen. And so we'll get right into it. Now, before we get into the build, I'll give a brief explanation about the way that Radial Javelin works. So Radial Javelin's kind of an exalted ability in a way where it has base damage and it has crit chance, status chance, and crit damage. Now, what those values are, I've at least been able to determine two of them. So crit damage, its base crit damage is 1x. Now, how have I determined that? Well, when you give it crit, let's say you give it crit with Arcane Avenger and Charm's crit chance buff, it doesn't change the damage. Now, there is a way to change the damage, and I might as well just pop this up. We won't get into too much detail. Run exactly this if you're running this build, and there's a lot of reasons for it. If you give it Tenacious Bond and a crit chance source, so like from Arcane Avenger and or from Charm, then it does do increased damage, and it is proportional math-wise to what you would expect for giving it going from 1x to like 2.2x on a crit chance. The other thing is because it has 0% crit chance and 1x crit damage, very similar to Slash Dash before the Pseudo Exalted rework, it also has a status chance percent, and I haven't been able to calculate this yet. This seems to be very difficult, but if I had to guess, just based on when you see it apply, not only, so it shows here it applies IPS, so sometimes it applies an extra slash, sometimes it applies a puncture, and sometimes it applies an impact status. So you can get all three IPS from this ability. I would guess anywhere from 10 to 15% is what the status chance of this is. Now, you could probably buff that using like Tau status effect with Finatru, which should work. I didn't really care to test that, but it does have a status chance that you could probably buff. Now, what I really wish that they would just do, and where I think this ability needs to get buffed, is just make it a pseudo exalted that scales off of Exalted Blade, but keep it to only IPS. So if, let's say, we'll just show this build off first. This is very similar to what my Afflictions build is. This is really just an evolution of my Afflictions build that I recently showcased. So let's say give it the same base stats as Exalted Blade, but then make it so that it's sort of a reverse chromatic blade where it only does IPS. So it converts any of these to just IPS damage, or I would say even just make it ignore elemental damage. So then ignoring this elemental damage that's applied here, it would still have a pretty good amount of damage to it. Like you're talking, in this case, like almost 3,000. If you look at the value there, that's kind of similar. But it would at least allow you to scale the crit chance and allow you to scale the status chance if you wanted to. And maybe even make it apply like, maybe code it as like a heavy attack. I don't know. I have forum posts on this that I've had a few forum posts on this, and I hope at some point they upgrade it, because it, without doing a lot of this crazy stuff, it gets it from like mediocre damage to usable damage. And when I say usable, I mean like Steel Path moderate level enemies up to like 200 some. So getting into the build, there's a few very important things to point out. So I'm running low duration. Now you'd think if we're running Roar and Furious Javelin, you would probably want some duration, except for the fact that you're recasting these a lot, because the idea behind using Radial Javelin as an actual damage ability and using Roar in this case as a defensive ability and a damage ability and your ability to maintain Arcane Impetus stacks, you're recasting these quite a lot. And now we'll get into the details of it. So sending strength as high as you possibly can. That includes running Growing Power, Augur Secrets, even Power Drift, which in this case, similar to my previous build with my Influence variation, or not my Influence, my Afflictions variation. If you're running this on Prime, run Warrior's Rest for this one. This is one of the few builds that I would say you really want to run Warrior's Rest for. And in this scenario, I'm not even running Prime Sure-Footed on it because it's a crutch. You're relying heavily on Slash Dash and Phasra and Void Sling in order to survive. So you're Prime Sure-Footed kind of redundant when you're always immune, or let's say if you're doing it right, if you're always immune. Increasing strength, you still want some sort of auger mod. If you don't have this feature, you'll come out of Slash Dash with no shields potentially, and that's instant death. The difference of instant death and not instant death is literally the small amount of shields that get generated from casting Slash Dash and then being shield immune now while you're in the chain, and then coming out of the chain with like, you know, even 20 shields is enough to prevent you from instantly dying. Very, very important to have. So if you're not running this, then you would want Brief Respite. But the math behind these, 49% strength is pretty good, and definitely along the lines of sending the strength to the moon. So when you're in full ramp with, like, let's say 14 stacks Arcane Impetus and this fully ramped up and then this conditional bonus active, you're at 500% strength in this build, which is pretty good. Not as high as the other one, but really good overall, which includes how much damage you get from Roar, which is a lot, including for you and your team, which if you're recasting this often at a 22-second duration, you're giving a pretty good boost to your team. Now, getting into Piercing Roar and how this works in multiple ways and why this is actually an important part of this build. So the increased range, sure. Enemies knocked down within 25 meters, also sure. But it's that puncture status effect that really matters. And if you're not brushed up on what puncture does, which I had to even brush myself up on what puncture does entirely, what puncture does is it gives you a base crit chance per stack. So it's like 5% per stack up to 5 stacks. So then you're getting effectively like Arcane Avenger base additive 25% crit chance, final crit chance on your abilities, and, or in this case, most of your abilities. Not Radial Javelin, unfortunately, but on like Slash Dash, which is important. If you remember with my Exalted Blade, it's at 56% some crit chance. This alone gets it a lot closer to being 100% and more reliably proccing crits. So very nice feature. The other feature that I even forgot about until recently is it provides damage reduction. So your the targets afflicted by puncture, one stack, let's say, reduces their damage by 50%, and then it's an additive 10% up to 90% reduced damage that they deal. And so you're knocking them down and you're reducing their damage by 90%. That's effectively like adaptation, but you don't have to worry about the stacks. So that's really nice. It also, this is the other feature of this, similar to what Nourish does when it has the little AoE proc, it helps maintain Arcane Impetus because this goes through walls. This isn't like the line of sight requirements on Furious or on Radial Javelin. This goes through walls and it has an insane range to it. You're talking 46 meter range on it. So this is a really good job at helping maintain impetus, because otherwise if you're at like 14 stacks of impetus and there's not very many enemies around you and you're slash dashing trying to find an enemy and you're like, crap, where are these enemies at? You just throw a random roar into the wind and then you get a impact, or I mean a puncture status on something, and then now you no longer lost your 14 stacks. So it's a nice feature for it. So it's a triple whammy. It's similar to Nourish in its ability to help keep the fluidity of this build. And then obviously Furious Javelin, even with the 11.6 duration, you're recasting this so much that it's really not a problem having this low duration, because I needed to get rid of Archon continuity in order to really fit all this in and get the max amount of strength. You could fit this in and reduce your strength, like going back to like switching out for this and then going back to Brief Respite, but then I would rather have this 49% strength than let's just say slightly more Brief Respite that you're not really relying on for survivability as a whole, and then having this extra duration. And the Toxin corrosive effect, not as important as really as you would think, because really the only reason why this Toxin and corrosive applied status is useful is to give you at least one extra stack of this reliably. But as I'll get into with our companion, Momentous Bond does that solo. So this will allow you to get up to 13 stacks. The only one you can't get is Tal, but you can get up to 13 stacks with just this alone if you're like in the duration of a mission. And then keeping in mind that you're able to, the way that Arcane Impetus stacks is because whenever you hit an enemy with this and they get knocked down, let's say if they've got all 13 status effects on them, you slash dash them, they get knocked down from that because they're not overguarded, they're actually able to be knocked down, which is the vast majority of enemies. Then when you apply those additional stacks, it counts as a unique status type for Arcane Impetus. And so it's as simple as that. You slash dash a target, it's got all 13 status effects on him. Like if you're using a Kuba Nukor with secondary encumber, which is one of my favorite ones to do it with when I'm testing. This alone, if you equip this and you're not some weirdo like me who doesn't equip primaries and secondaries, this can get you to 13 stacks reliably, very quickly, with really no, super easy, barely an inconvenient sort of tier. But I do it the hard way because I like the simplicity of this and the fissure bonus simplicity of 50% chance or 100% chance to have something useful at a 50% chance to get melee damage or ability strength and range. I don't believe I've shown these yet, but energy orb effectiveness, absolutely required. If you're running this on Umbra, I wouldn't bother doing one of the starting energy to like mitigate his Spectre issue because you're probably running Warrior's Rest. Not an issue if you're running Warrior's Rest. So just run triple energy orb effectiveness, and then these casting speeds are very important on this build. You don't want to not have these because you're casting a lot and you're casting very slow abilities. Pretty much two of the slowest casting abilities that you can get in the game, ignoring like, you know, Necros' Shadows. That one's painfully slow, but you're not immune to damage during either of these, so you want them to be fast so that you don't die while you're casting them. This is partially not only just Radial Javelin, but also maximizing Dual Ichor. That's sort of a combinational build of this, and it's the same build as usual. If you don't have a Riven for it, just run Prime Pressure Point. And if you do have a Riven for it, at least make it better than Prime Pressure Point. You don't run Condition Overload on this because it doesn't apply to the clouds. So you run this, or even like a +2 Riven will outperform this because a +2 Riven will be greater than 165% melee damage. But if you do it, you roll a Riven, get like melee damage, and then literally anything else. Literally anything else will be better. So that's a simple explanation for that. So without dragging on any further, we'll just get in and I'll show gameplay as usual. Same control mission. The downside of this build, and this is where starting energy is maybe still useful. I've been playing with this, but in the beginning of the mission, you don't have a lot of energy, and so when you're trying to slash dash through the mission in order to just finish it, it's a little difficult. But one thing you can kind of abuse is that pretty good chance of getting an energy orb slash dash. Archon Flow, like right there, just procced. Alright. I think we've done enough. Another thing to note, with Tandem Bond, for you to really send your companion damage high, you want to actually heavy attack a target with it. You can't just like proc it from not hitting a target. You actually have to melee attack or heavy attack an actual target to do it. It's not like in Karnan buffs where you can hit nothing and have a proc. So I'll just sort of sweat out here and show you gameplay.
Life support incoming.
Where this will really be powerful is you can kind of see some of the damage numbers here. But where it'll be really powerful is once we get a Cat's Eye, or get the Charm version of Cat's Eye, which is the 200% crit chance.
Add a life support capsule to the area. Activating it will buy you more time.
So without just spamming the ability, the energy economy is pretty good with this. Just noticing these enemies are dying. And on most of my missions, I kind of use this as a control for this. Most of my missions, I don't have a very large gap between total kills and melee kills, because slash dash counts as melee kills. The only things that don't count as melee kills in this build is Radial Javelin and my Kavat with my companion. The Dual Ichor Clouds, Dual Ichor Melee, and slash dash all count as melee. So, lightly discuss this here. I'm using the same feature where if you quick melee going back, it's faster than recasting your transference. So noting this goes through walls. In comparison to that, it doesn't. That goes through walls. Disadvantage here, and I just got 2 additional stacks of impetus from that. When you're doing this much damage with Roar and with Furious Javelin and such stacks up, it's more difficult for you to actually get impetus stacks because you just kill everything. It's essentially a self-correcting issue, but the downside is you don't get that extra efficiency. The difference between an extra few stacks or not on efficiency is probably insignificant, but it is something to consider. Hopefully we get a good charm buff so I can demonstrate this beforehand. He's noting there, these guys are killing enemies just fine. Well, we'll see if I can show this on an Acolyte. The goal here is create a... Oh. Okay. What Acolyte? Just showing there, I'm not even meleeing these, or don't even have Dual Ichor Clouds down, and they're able to kill enemies just fine. Currently at 141% on Roar, with a really good range and a decent duration. There's our crit buff. So look at this. Just in time. Look at that. It's so dumb. Oh, we need energy. What was it? 219k.
Our operative is making progress. This will help our cause. Extraction is available if you need it.
Now that's on unarmored targets, obviously, but that's it's pretty good. And just looking at that gap, I've got over 100 kills that are not from my usual ways of doing it. So either my companion is doing a lot of damage, which Roar helps with that, as well as the other bonuses that I give it. But pretty satisfying, I would say. It's a unique playstyle. I think it's a good version 2 or slight variation of my Dual Ichor build. Nourish overall is going to just be probably more quality of life. I would say this is a really sweaty build. It takes a lot more to maintain this, and you're heavily reliant on Vazarin to survive, which isn't an issue even at Steel Path, Omnia, Void Cascade at level cap. Vazarin works just fine. Anyone who tells you otherwise simply doesn't test these things. I highly doubt the people that are saying you need to have Maturai. I highly doubt I would say the people that are saying you need Maturai at level cap are either being dishonest or they haven't tested it. So I've spent the vast majority of my time using Vazarin, Unaru, and Naramin, all Omnia, Steel Path, Void Cascade at level cap, and it's just fun. So, just food for thought. So yeah, that's a, I think, good demonstration of the build. To sort of recap, we'll go and show Radial Javelin. Radial Javelin has base damage, it does IPS, and then it has a status chance, it has a crit chance, and it has a crit damage multiplier. And you can buff the crit chance and crit damage multiplier using Smeeta Kavat between Charm and Tenacious Bond, which does increase the damage by, when I calculated it out on the numbers I was seeing, it was 3.476 times, or like 347% increase in multiplicative damage from crit damage alone. And then you can buff it with Roar. In this build, the Roar gets up to 100, over 140%, potentially, I think it's like 145% of the maximum. So really, really solid. And then Radial Javelin, even without the crit chance buff, does like decent damage. You don't really need that much duration. And hopefully, and this is probably the case too, if you're someone that doesn't really play Excalibur a lot and you don't want to be using your red or violet shards and you have a lot of amber shards, you can run these, and you could run regular versions or just full Tau, but I'd say this is really efficient overall if you wanted to just have a really fun build that uses all of Excalibur's abilities in a really satisfying way. This build doesn't prevent you from using Exalted Blade when you want to. It's just, it's not primarily an Exalted Blade build. That's where my other builds come in with like melee influence. Simply melee influence, if you want an Exalted Blade only build, that's the best option. But if you want the overall just using Excalibur to its full extent, I would say this is probably as close as you can get to just having so much utility and so much variety on how you're using his abilities. So yeah, thanks for watching.